Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Barnes & Thornburg. I'm Deborah Pollock-Milgate. I'm a partner in the Intellectual Property Department, and happy to welcome you, as I often do, to the Life Sciences Lifeline. Today's topic is funding for breast cancer research and clinical trials, and I'm glad that so many of you made it out today. Someone was just reminding me how cold it was last month. Apparently, we have chosen another cold day. I promise you that was not intentional. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over so we can get started and dig in to Kristen Jones, President and CEO of the Indiana Life Sciences Association. See how well I did that? Okay, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. One more housekeeping item. You do have cards. I will be paying attention for those cards during the presentation. If you have a question, because we record this, it's much easier if you write it down. I will keep an eye out, come around, grab the questions, and then pass them up to our panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Good afternoon, everybody. Wow, great turnout, and especially for February, and especially on a very cold day, and especially for just a Tuesday in general. So thank you all for making the trip and joining us. We have a fabulous panel today, and I am very excited to have these three folks up here. This has been a topic of conversation between us for a while. Between us for a month or two now. And Randy, it's a pleasure to meet you. Randy is here in place of Brian Stemme today, who is down with the flu, as several other people are apparently out there in the world. So we'll hope he gets well soon, but we're delighted to have you with us today. My name is Kristen Jones. I'm President and CEO of the Indiana Life Sciences Association. I think most of the folks here in the room know us, although there are some new faces. So if you don't, we are the Life Sciences Trade Association here in the state of Indiana. I like a name that says it all, and we're happy to finally have one of those. So joining me up here today, and I'm just gonna go from my right to left, I guess. Is Stephanie Lesher. Stephanie is the Vice President, Fund Manager. I keep calling her the COO. That may or may not be correct, with the Catherine Peachey Fund. This is a phenomenal organization that we've been working with for many years, and absolutely delighted. And she is part of the genesis of this whole conversation and the reason that Miriam Dant and I got to know each other a month or two ago and found out more about House Bill 1299 that we're going to hear more about today. Miriam is with Dant Advocacy, and help me make sure I get this right. You're representing the Hoosier Breast Cancer Advocacy Coalition group, should hopefully.
Hoosier Breast Cancer Advocates.
Okay, that's what I meant. All right, thank you. And then last but not least, we have Randy Dillinger. Randy is with the Hoosier Cancer Research Network here today, and he is the Director of Business Development and Communications. So I'm here to carry the torch and carry on in Brian's stead. So thank you very much for joining us. Miriam, let's get started with you. And so we'll just dive kind of right into the topic here. If you'd like to talk us through a little bit about House Bill 1299, session is in full swing. We're coming up to a pivotal point here this week. So tell us a little bit about the bill and maybe what sparked its need and where it's going.
Happy to do that. I have had a government affairs firm for about 18 years and represent a variety of clients. I have to say the work that I've had the pleasure of doing for Hoosier Breast Cancer Advocates is near and dear to my heart, not only as a breast cancer survivor, but as an opportunity to really positively impact breast cancer policy in Indiana, which is something that the state hasn't really focused as much on as we believe it should. I have to give a shout out to Heather Porowski and Carrie Cagnasola. They are the founders of Hoosier Breast Cancer Advocates, or HBCA to keep it short. Fellow breast cancer survivors who saw a need for a grassroots advocacy organization focused on breast cancer. And we all come through the circle of the Catherine Peachey Fund, and you'll be hearing from Stephanie about that later. The Catherine Peachey Fund has been the connector in so many positive things. So last year was HBCA's first round at the State House, and we are very proud to say that we were able to get unanimous passage of a law that conforms Indiana to FDA's new dense breast notification language. So women who have dense breast tissue in their mammogram report now, they are told that if you have dense breast tissue, a mammogram alone may not be sufficient to detect cancerous tissue, and you should talk to your doctor about whether additional testing is available. We had many breast cancer survivors tell their stories about how that additional screening allowed them to have their breast cancer detected early and possibly save their lives, certainly made their treatment more smooth and successful. We're back with another idea. This session, we learned over the summer, again through Stephanie's connections, that the IU Simon Comprehensive Cancer Center right here in Indianapolis recently retained a top designation from the National Cancer Institute, which puts it at the level of research facilities like the Mayo Clinic, like MD Anderson. This is a big deal to have in Indiana. It is Indiana's only top NCI designated facility. These facilities are all over the country, but we learned that in the Simon Comprehensive Cancer Center's designation process, there were 6 benchmark criteria that NCI looked at. They had top ratings in 5 of them. In one rating, they were told Indiana is an anomaly in that there is no state, they call it institutional support for cancer research. In other words, most states that have this top NCI designation for a research facility provide some level of state research dollars for those programs. Indiana is in the minority in not doing that. So we set out to try to change that. For any of you that follow the legislative process, and apologies in advance because it's not always fun or pretty to watch. We had a bill introduced, House Bill 1299, that would create a state grant fund for breast cancer research. Now, we focused on breast cancer research because, as you heard, we are the Hoosier Breast Cancer Advocates Organization. However, all cancer research, any funding to any cancer research would be beneficial in this process. The bill passed unanimously out of the House Public Health Committee last month, which was fantastic. However, because we're in a budget session in the Indiana legislature, and because the bill obviously has a fiscal impact, it has to go next to the House Ways and Means Committee. All bills that cost the state any amount of money, other than a minimal amount, have to get approved by that committee. Without going through all the ins and outs of it, the Ways and Means Committee finished their hearings for the first half of session without hearing House Bill 1299. In some worlds, that would mean that the concept is dead. It's not going to move any farther along. However, because this is a budget bill issue, the budget bill has many more weeks of work yet to be done. And there's over 2.5 months for us to still get the language into the budget at the end of session. We, our basis for asking for this is not only the obvious benefit to Hoosier breast cancer patients, both women and men, of having better research and better clinical trials right here in their home state, meaning they don't have to travel out of state, maybe for a life-saving clinical trial. They don't have to upend their lives and their families' lives to move, spend money that, you know, in an already challenging financial situation, being having cancer. But it also has the beneficial, I'll use the word side effect since we're in that realm here, of promoting economic development in Indiana. You all know from your day-to-day jobs how important the life sciences industry is to Indiana. I don't have to tell you the statistics, but the number of jobs and tax base and even intellectual property that comes from research and clinical trials in Indiana, new drug development. We have examples of how medical manufacturing facilities and pharmaceuticals have done projects right here in Indiana because of research done at Purdue or IU or Notre Dame, clinical trials at IU that have resulted in really important cancer treatments. We looked at what other states are doing. Just to give you an example of kind of what we're up against in our competition with other states. Kentucky has one NCI facility. In the last 3 years, the state of Kentucky has dedicated $25 million to cancer research. West Virginia in 2023 dedicated $50 million just to become eligible to get an NCI designation. North Carolina, big research state, as you all know, has 3 facilities. They have dedicated over $57 million. And in their analysis of the benefits of those dollars, they have shown a 12-to-1 return on investment. Arkansas, $100 million over 2 years in pursuit of an NCI designation. And one of the biggest ones, Florida, has 4 NCI facilities, including $127 million of state funds for research at the Casey DeSantis Research Center. The grant program that we are trying to get set up would be administered by the State Department of Health. It's actually modeled after a grant program for sickle cell anemia research. Our proposal is funded out of the Tobacco Master Settlement Fund, which is a fund that Indiana and I think most other states participate in. It comes out of tobacco litigation from many years ago, and it results in significant dollars into the state every year. We were directed to not look at using state tax dollars for this fund because state tax dollars with a $1 billion Medicaid shortfall and many other priorities that the legislature has are just simply too limited. The State Department of Health would administer the fund. IU and Purdue would essentially be the main entities that are qualified to apply for the fund. And we are trying to we're going to try to get it reinvigorated. Just real quickly, I want to tell you about 2 other bills, if that's okay, that you all might be interested in and what their status is. So House Bill 1453 deals with pediatric cancer research, and it's similar to the HBCA breast cancer bill, but for the fact that unlike our bill, which asked for $3.5 million over each of the next 2 budget years, their bill didn't ask for a dollar amount. Their bill also got out of the Public Health Committee unanimously, and it did get a hearing in House Ways and Means. However, in that hearing, the committee stripped the language that gave the state the ability to put any money in the fund. So basically made it of no value. That bill also is sitting stuck. It needs to be moved on 2nd reading by tomorrow. It is currently not on the calendar for that, let alone 3rd reading in the House by Thursday. So we don't know if that bill is going to see the light of day any further or not. But again, with a budget request, there are a lot of other places that you can go. The other bill I want to mention to you is House Bill 1065. This bill has passed out of all the required committees and out of the House and will be going over to the Senate. It is a completely optional program. It allows an organization or entity to establish and administer a cancer clinical trial participation program for the purpose of providing payments to a participant for certain costs incurred while participating in a cancer clinical trial. So a way to help ease the burden on clinical trial patients. As I said, it's completely voluntary. It's funded completely privately, no state dollars going into it. The original version of the bill said the Department of Health shall provide informational materials on this program. In committee, the bill was amended to say the Department of Health may provide those informational materials. So another pretty weak bill, but at this point in the session, anything that deals with cancer research, we want to keep it going.
Get my microphone working here. Thank you. That was a great overview of that. So with its sort of stopped, we'll say, or halted at the moment, what are some of the options going forward, and how can people maybe help urge that along?
Yeah, that's a really important question. So, the budget process is a lot of behind closed doors conversations, especially in the second half of April when they really start putting pen to paper and writing what will be the final state budget. So we're going to be meeting with as many legislators now on the Senate side as we can to try to gin up support for including this in the budget and to take their support to the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, who is basically the Senate budget writer. And anyone who wants to see this move forward, I would encourage you to contact your legislator either by email or phone call. We don't have to refer to House Bill 1299 anymore since technically that doesn't exist. But if in your request you state your support for state funding of breast cancer research programs, that would go a long way. Legislators really do pay attention to their constituents. And you can find out who your legislator is by going to the Indiana General Assembly website. There is a tab to put in your address, and it will tell you who your state reps and state senators are. If your company has an interest in it, that's also a great way to state support. Your company may even have representation at the State House, and we would love to include you in our cadre of supporters. And then the final way that you can support is, Kristen asked me to address, we are hosting, HBCA is hosting the first ever Pink Out the State House. So many advocacy groups, professions, trade associations hold advocacy days at the State House. They bring in their members. They bring in citizens, they have speakers, the tables where you can get information about whatever the cause or issue is, meetings with legislators. I'll point to Heather Porowski, who is organizing that whole day. There are great opportunities for you, your company, your association to attend or even to be a sponsor. And I would encourage you to talk to Heather after the program today, and she can tell you how to sign up for any sort of participation that you want to lend.
Perfect. And I will point out that the Indiana Life Sciences Association is going to be sponsoring and will be in attendance on Monday, March 31st. So thank you, Heather. Thank you, Miriam. Thank you for all that. Stephanie, I think time for the Catherine Peachey Fund. And if you want to grab the microphone there, sorry, we got to share back and forth.
Fine.
Want to do a special shout out to Stephen Peachey, who's here today. Stephen, thank you so much for coming and being so supportive of everything we've been trying to do and just all the way along. So thank you so much for joining us. Stephanie, you and I have been back and forth and friends over this forever and a day at this point. It feels like the Catherine Peachey Fund also turned 30 years old last year. And so congratulations, we're organizational age twins, but neither of us is a day over 12.
Oh.
So, we'll go with that one.
Yeah.
Can you share, just so folks who may not be aware of the fund, tell us a little bit more about what it is, how it came to be, give us the history and background?
Sure. I love talking about it. So thank you, Kristen, for having us and for your continued support. So Catherine Peachey was an Indianapolis native. If you've been around long enough, you might remember the Cath Inc. coffee shops. There was one in Meridian Kessler and one downtown at City Market. Kathy was the founder and owner of those. And she lost her battle with breast cancer at the age of 41. She left behind her husband and 3 young children. My mom is a 2-time breast cancer survivor and met Kathy towards the end of her life. My mom was very inspired by her, went to Washington, D.C. with her. Kathy lobbied for the first federal funding for breast cancer research during the Clinton administration shortly before she passed away. And her dying wish was for her family and friends to continue to fight for breast cancer research. Her brother, Stephen Sr., and my mom founded the Catherine Peachey Fund in 1994. Stephen Jr. and I are now second generation, continuing to carry on her legacy and to make an impact, which to date, we're a 100% volunteer organization. We're grassroots, and to date, we have funded nearly $4 million in breast cancer research in Indiana. In addition to that, we have a $1 million endowment for prevention research at the IU Simon Cancer Research Center. And since its inception, that endowment has funded about $730,000 of prevention research for breast cancer. We do not operate with a traditional application cycle. Instead, we choose to remain nimble so that we can address the needs of our researchers in an efficient and timely manner. One thing that makes us unique is that we know our researchers personally. We follow them, we take them to lunch, we enjoy happy hours with them, we visit their labs so that we give gifts rather than grants, but our relationship with our researchers is our way of being able to track their research and make sure that we're meeting their needs and that they're living up to their agreement with us. Our priorities include, as I said, breast cancer prevention, also treatment and improved outcomes for patients, as well as education. I mentioned our prevention endowment, and recently I can let you know that some of what that endowment has been funding is research around exercise as prevention. And also they know that that exercising during treatments helps improve the efficacy of the treatments. So there's a lot of really interesting research around exercise, and that's some of what that endowment I know is currently funding. A lot of our funding outside of the endowment, just our day-to-day, year-over-year funding, it operates a lot like venture capital. We're not like the NIH or the Department of Defense or Komen, Vera Bradley. We are a smaller, more boutique funding source. I would say that our gifts range from anywhere from $20,000 up to $250,000. So a lot of what we're doing is funding novel ideas, young researchers. I know many of you in the room understand that to go get those larger grants from those large funding sources, you have to have an amount of data. So they say that you have to have data to get dollars, but you have to have dollars to get data. So we are proud of the fact that we fill a niche here in Indiana where we help our researchers, again, with novel ideas, younger researchers, as well as, very esteemed principal investigators. But we oftentimes will give that initial funding that will help them go on and get the larger funding. And we have a really good track record with that. A couple of examples that I'd like to give are we were the initial funders for what is now known as the Komen Tissue Bank. And we continue to support the tissue bank. We volunteer at their tissue collections. We support their interns. And we have financially supported them along the way as well. And
Can you just say real briefly what the Komen Tissue Bank is
yes,
for people who may not know?
So everyone in this room should be so proud to have this in our state. It is the only one of its kind in the world. It's a bank of normal breast tissue. And the Komen Tissue Bank, my mom is one of the co-founders, so I have been around this forever and feel a certain amount of ownership in it. I have several of my own personal samples in the bank. The definition of normal in this case is different than maybe some other tissue banks who will take normal tissue. For example, when a tumor is being removed, they may remove additional non-tumor tissue and have considered that in the past as normal, but we know that's not normal. If it's anywhere adjacent to cancerous cells, then it's not normal. The tissue that's being donated to the Komen Tissue Bank is from healthy individuals who voluntarily go and have a biopsy and give their tissue to the tissue bank. And there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 5,000 samples of breast tissue, many more than that of blood samples. And they have worked very hard to make sure that the tissue is representative of our communities. So they work very hard at getting donations from Black women, Asian women, young women. They've got quite a lot of middle-aged Caucasian women tissue. So right now I know they're working really hard. And actually something really exciting that that has just happened is that the WNBA All-Star Game that's going to be here this summer is going to shine a spotlight on the Komen Tissue Bank, and they're going to be doing a 2-day collection at that time. They did something very similar when Indianapolis hosted the Super Bowl. And so that's really exciting. I hope, is that enough information to
Very
explain what that is? Okay. Okay, and then the other example I wanted to give of sort of our a success in the VC world, if you will, of supporting breast cancer research is we provided a $250,000 gift to Dr. Hari Nakshatri's research on the taxonomy of the normal breast. And that initial funding went on to garner the balance of the funding that was needed from the Chan Zuckerberg initiative. So we were really excited and proud to have been the ones to kind of initiate that. And the findings from that project were just published in Nature magazine in August. So that's a big win and one that we're particularly proud of.
Fabulous. The part I really want people to understand is that you're a very unique organization. There's nobody else out there doing what you're doing in
I
this
know, and I
space.
ask you that. Every once in a while, I ask Kristen, because I know she's in other states and learning about what other folks are doing. And you've told me that
We've
what we do is unique.
Never run across anybody for this. So this is a very important resource. It's very important and very focused on Indiana. So we're very fortunate to have them here and doing so much impactful and great work. I want you to just talk a little bit about the Amelia Project.
Yes.
Or which is now been renamed, and I can't seem to get that out of my
Oh, we
head,
can't
but
either. Don't worry.
The Peachey Project.
Yes.
ahead.
Okay. So I mentioned that one of our other priorities is education. We address that again by supporting the interns at the Komen Tissue Bank. We are an education sponsor for an annual meeting called the Breast Health Summit, which is put on by Pink Forever Ending Disparities, and we support their efforts. But really the cornerstone annual event for the Catherine Peachey Fund is now called the Peachey Project Bench to Breakthroughs. And this is, I'm told again, a very unique meeting that brings together breast cancer researchers from around the state of Indiana. So University of Notre Dame, Purdue University, the IU Simon Cancer Center. We are always encouraging researchers from other universities, like, for example, Rose-Hulman, Marion University, where there's Indiana State has a new cancer center. Research that's being done on breast cancer elsewhere too. And we really want it to be a comprehensive meeting in terms of the breast cancer research that's happening in our state. Couple things are really unique about this. One is the advocate component. So in addition to the researchers that are in the room, which include, by the way, everything from the senior researchers at these universities all the way through their PhD students, their students that are getting their masters, and even always a handful of undergrads, there's an advocate component to this meeting. So breast cancer advocates, which include people like us, and they come from other organizations, also attend the meeting. And it really demonstrates to the researchers sort of the full circle of life of cancer research, in that, of course, the advocates need these scientists doing the research, but the scientists also need us out there fundraising and advocating at the State House with our donors. And so it's a really wonderful opportunity for the advocates to interact with the researchers. And then there's always an advocate panel. And a couple years ago, I'll never forget this year, there were several breast cancer survivors who were on the panel speaking out to a room of scientists, many of whom were young, and their world of breast cancer was in the lab at the bench. And they were looking at these breast cancer survivors in the eyes as the survivors were talking about some of the really difficult side effects that their treatments had caused them. I mean, some really ugly side effects. And these young kids, I mean, there were tears in so many of their eyes. And there were new research questions coming out of the panel. So they were coming up afterwards and saying, oh my gosh, I want to investigate, you know, this particular side effect that you were having and how we can improve that. And so the meeting generates new ideas. It also generates phenomenal, beautiful collaborations. So another thing that's unique about the meeting is that these principal investigators from these major universities, and always a keynote that comes from somewhere else in the country, Harvard, this year, there's someone coming from the University of Michigan that'll speak, and they'll be up in the front of the room with their talk and their slides, and there'll be someone in the back of the room that from another university that'll raise their hand and say, well, you're doing X, we're doing Y and Z, we need to talk. And as an advocate, to see those collaborations happening and to know that this meeting is creating efficiencies and, you know, faster answers and faster treatments. As a daughter of a 2-time breast cancer survivor, as other breast cancer survivors in the room, it's just beautiful. And it's really unique. I'm told that this just really doesn't happen elsewhere. And it's another example of, Kristen, I've heard you talk about things that just happen in Indiana because Hoosiers are so open and giving and, you know, collaborative. So that's what that meeting's all about.
Absolutely excellent. And that's one of the reasons I wanted you to talk about it. So thank you for that. And when is that coming up this year?
Saturday, March 8th.
Oh, so it's right around the corner.
Right around the corner. And I
Wonderful.
will say that while there hasn't traditionally been a lot of industry that has attended the meeting, they're welcome. And the coordinators of the meeting are Hari Nakshatri and Kathy Miller at the Cancer Center, and they have let me know that industry is welcome. So if you're particularly interested in attending, just let me know and I can work to make that happen.
And we can make those connections for you. You have another more open event later in the year, I
Yeah.
believe June-ish.
Yep.
Would you like to maybe talk a little bit about wine
I
tasting
would.
with Peachey?
Thank
Because you're
you.
doing
I
some big
appreciate
stuff this
that.
year.
I appreciate that. Well, since we are 100% volunteer and grassroots, we tend to raise money and give it away. We don't like a lot of money sitting in our checking account. That's doing no one any good. And our largest fundraiser of the year is Wine Tasting with Peachey. It's going to be on Monday, June 23rd this year. And it's our 10th annual, and it grows every year, even through COVID. We were able to grow the event, raise more money each year. We're excited because we're having to move to a larger venue this year. We're going to Iron and Ember, which is at Brookshire Golf Club. It's a beautiful new event space. And we're going to have putting for Peachey. We highlight Peacewater Winery wines. They've been our partner from the beginning. Cater Me Cafe does our catering. Their owner's is a breast cancer survivor and very generous with us. We have a silent auction, live music, and we are still working on getting sponsors. Kristen's organization is always a sponsor, and this year Eli Lilly's agreed to be a sponsor. The IU Simon Cancer Center is a sponsor, just to name a few. But we have information here that we're happy to share with any of you about that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Always look forward to that event. It is always fun.
It is a lot of fun.
Always crazy hot.
Well,
but it is also crazy fun.
It's true, but I will say our new venue, we made sure has really good air conditioning. There is a beautiful outdoor patio and a putting green. So there's an outside component, but if it's really hot, as it has been in years past, we've got that covered this year.
Yeah, well, it just makes the wine go down that much easier.
That's
so
true.
Always a great time and always a great cause. And we've been very happy to support it for 10 years.
Yes,
Awesome.
thank you.
Very excited about that. None of this happens without putting rubber to the road. And where that happens is really in clinical trials. And Randy, again, so glad you could join us today. Can you just share with the audience a little bit more about the background of Hoosier Cancer Research Network and what your mission and objectives are?
Absolutely. And thank you. This is a pleasure to be with you today. And certainly I'm in very good company up on stage. So I want to give you a little bit of background. Hoosier Cancer Research Network was founded about 40 years ago, really emerging from a vision by former Cancer Center Director Pat Lehrer. Many of you know Dr. Lehrer. As he was finishing his fellowship at IU, he realized that there wasn't much opportunity for individuals who were engaged in community-based cancer care to participate in research. And so he, along with a gentleman named Bill Fisher from the Muncie Cancer Center, got together and they talked about how could we build a collaborative structure to run clinical trials in the state of Indiana, ideas that are born out of the Cancer Center and opened at communities across Indiana so that patients don't have to travel long distances to get their treatment. That idea really took root, and over the course of a few years and with the support of industry, what was then known as Hoosier Oncology Group launched a number of studies that were significant. And over time, that collaboration grew to become a regional network. And now today, 40 years later, we have 100 institutions nationwide that are a part of the Hoosier Network. These include about 60 academic institutions, most of which are NCI designated comprehensive cancer centers. And we still have about 40 community networks that are active through the Hoosier Network as well. This idea of academic and community collaboration has remained a core of our mission from our founding, and that I'm convinced will always be a part of our mission. We operate out of Indianapolis. We have a team of 55 people, all with individualized, specialized roles supporting clinical research. Many of you are familiar with contract research organizations, and you can think of us as a CRO plus. What I mean by that is we all have roles that support clinical trials, but we go beyond that in our nonprofit mission by supporting the working groups where conversations between investigators happen. We support events, we support in-person meetings where collaboration can happen between industry, between investigators, and we bring in institutions together to talk about best practices. Currently, we support about between our Big Ten, which I'll talk about in a moment, our Big Ten Consortium and the Hoosier Consortium, we support about 30 different clinical trial working groups, and these are across all disease areas. They bring together key opinion leaders from institutions across our network, both experienced leaders as well as younger investigators who are early in their careers. So these 30 groups are the venues in which ideas are discussed, they're vetted, they're developed, and what I would say perfected to a point where they can be submitted to funders, pharmaceutical companies or philanthropic groups. And these are really well-designed protocols that are ready to be activated on day one. Again, with support from funders. So we have, again, about those 30 groups that are active. Our office supports the discussions that happen. And then like a CRO, we are involved in every aspect of managing studies that are approved and developed through our network. We have people that are dedicated to developing budgets, contracts, which is always the most tricky part of a conversation, getting a clinical trial going. We have regulatory staff. We have data staff that will build databases. They'll build sample collection manuals for the correlative studies that are involved in our studies. We have project managers that will basically be the point person for every clinical trial we open, taking it from activation all the way to publication. And all of this happens in Indianapolis. Again, a team of about 55 people. I think we're rather unique in that we're doing this as a nonprofit. And I wanted to also take just a minute to talk about some of the breast cancer studies that we're running, because that's most concerning to this group today. We have supported Indiana University with some genomically based clinical trials. There was a study that a few years ago completed that showed the importance of ctDNA testing for residual disease following surgery. And ctDNA is circulating tumor DNA that can be left over, that is not detectable or visible. But we know now that that residual ctDNA can be a marker for early recurrence of disease. And so that study helped to establish the importance of having ctDNA as part of post-surgery treatment. Another study that followed on that study looked at, for patients who had ctDNA positivity, could we genomically target specific treatment that would be tailored to their needs? And that study recently closed. We don't have results from that yet, but that was also led by Indiana University. And I want to give a shout out to Brian Schneider, who led both of those studies. Currently, we are also looking at a number of studies dealing with targeted therapies. And these are across different subtypes of breast cancer. And this is one of the challenges in cancer research. You make progress, but there's always populations that don't respond to treatment. And the challenge to investigators is, what are we going to do for those patients that are left behind? So more and more, we're looking at clinical trial proposals that deal with subtypes of cancer patients. So currently, we're looking at cancer studies, currently running studies in ER positive, HER2 positive cancers, HR positive, HER2 negative, triple negative, HER2 negative, advanced HER2 positive with isolated brain metastases. All these variations can go on and on, but the main point is that we are actively looking at therapeutic options for patients who did not respond to prior treatments. Some of the agents that we're looking at are, and this may be Greek to some, it may be recognizable to others, agents such as neratinib and trastuzumab. These are HER2 targeting agents that help to block HER2 proteins, which can cause cancer cells to divide and grow more rapidly. So by blocking HER2, we're helping to control that cancer longer. Ribociclib is another agent we're looking at, and that's a CDK inhibitor that likewise will help to block the action of kinase in the body. And kinase is one of the factors that fuels the growth and division of cancer cells. We're looking at radiosurgery and PARP inhibitors, a drug called olaparib. And in one particular study that is also involving immunotherapy after that course of treatment. And this is for patients with brain metastases. PARP inhibitors block the ability of the PARP protein from cancer cells repairing their own damage. So that's an important way that cancer cells get around our attempts to eliminate it by repairing their own damage. So PARP goes after that capability. And the immunotherapy drug durvalumab, which is a part of that study, helps the body to recognize cancer cells. It activates the immune system. So all of these drugs combined serve unique purposes to help us overcome cancer. We are also looking at studies, we're supporting studies that involve antibody drug conjugates. This is a new kind of modality where you have a combination of a targeting agent that attaches to a cell that's cancerous and then delivers a cytotoxic agent directly to that cancer cell. What this does is it allows treatment to deliver kind of a superpowered attack on cancer while leaving the surrounding healthy tissues unaffected. I know some of you in this room are involved in ADC development, and I look forward to talking more with you. But this is definitely a new area of research that we're happy to support. We've also worked with a group called the Translational Breast Cancer Research Consortium, and this is a group of about, I'm going to get the number wrong, but it's a dozen or so significant universities, NCI designated universities that are working collaboratively, and we've supported a couple of studies for them. Big Ten Cancer Research Consortium, I do want to make sure I touch on this as well. This is a collaboration of all the Big Ten cancer centers. I know probably everyone in this room is familiar with Big Ten. As you know, we had 4 new West Coast institutions join the conference in the past year. The Big Ten Cancer Research Consortium is currently working with those new institutions to bring them in as members of the Big Ten CRC. Currently, we have 16 members of the conference that are part of the consortium. The consortium operates very similarly to how I described how we support the Hoosier Network, but it goes a little bit beyond in that there are conversations that happen between the institutions about NCI designation renewals. What can we do to increase our funding potential? How can we advance and enhance what we're doing for patient survivorship, et cetera? So these are things that go beyond just clinical trials that we're supporting. They're about how can we build up each other's institutions and become the best consortium that's out there. So that's probably a good place to stop for now.
You did a fabulous job, and you covered every single question I had written down there, so thank you. And you also are very good at getting the monoclonal antibody names out. They just roll off your tongue. That's very, very
It
impressive.
helps when you hear them a lot.
You clearly have practiced quite a bit. So thank you. Thank you for that great overview. I will remind anybody, if you have questions, please write them on your cards. We'll come around and pick them up and just make sure. But I also know there is an elephant in the room with us today, and that relates to the questions around NIH funding cuts, suspensions on data, all sorts of things that have been happening in our world the last couple of weeks and making everyone a little unsteady and unsure. I know it doesn't directly impact you necessarily, but research funding through the NIH in Indiana is a huge number, $427 million. But because that money goes out to buy things and do things, it has a $1.1 billion impact on our industry here in the state. So it's large, it's important, and it's something everybody needs to be paying attention to and speaking up about. That's just me saying that. Do you have any sense at this point what this means for the people you're working with, what the researchers you're working with are feeling about this, what the companies that are working with you folks are thinking about any of this? And Miriam, I don't know if you have any more direct insight on any of that or not, or?
I could just share since I have the microphone. The majority of the work that we do is funded by pharmaceutical companies, and so we are likely not to see a direct impact at Hoosier, but we do work with academic institutions that are heavily impacted by what's happening. I can tell you that at a conference I was at last month, we had investigators who were expecting to show up and give presentations who were told, your presentation is canceled. You cannot attend anymore because the NCI events are now canceled. That was a month ago. And some of those same individuals at another conference I was at last week were still not able to participate. So we've lost a month of participation in vital clinical research discussions. And a month is a very significant amount of time when it comes to collaboration. Things cannot stop on a dime. And I don't need to, I'm preaching to the choir when I say that, but there are real people that are impacted by this decision. I do want to mention briefly that we recently conducted a survey across all of our network of our investigators. We had about 130 researchers who responded to our survey about their experiences leading clinical trials. And it was notable that, and this is before the change in administration, a third of our investigators said that the limited ability to gain grant funding is a significant issue for them. More than 50% of our investigators said that it's at least a moderate or a significant impact, meaning the challenge to get grant funding. I'm sure that number will be higher now based on what we're seeing. We also learned that about 36% of the funding that our investigators have across all their studies comes from institutional or NIH sources. And so both of those sources of funding from the institution and the NIH could be potentially impacted by what we're seeing.
My only comment is I would just argue that the state funding is needed more than ever. I don't know that if that argument that the feds aren't coming through, so the state should, would gain traction in Indiana, but we have to say it.
Yeah, I certainly agree with Miriam. And while I don't, while I don't think that any of the researchers that the Catherine Peachey Fund has supported really know for sure how their research is going to be impacted quite yet, we are following it closely because, as I said, so much of our funding is seed funding. So we know that a lot of the research that we have funded will potentially be affected by this. And we have worked so hard for so long to get these projects started. And personally, it's breaking my heart to watch this. And I don't mean to put extra pressure on Miriam and her team, but I mean, Indiana would be going from $0 towards cancer research to whatever we would be able to potentially get. And that could only help. And the Catherine Peachey Fund is never going to be able to fill the gap because we're not big enough. So yeah, we're following it. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, I think it's so much of it still has to be written, and it is something we are watching carefully. So if you're following this, know that we are paying attention out there and trying to communicate as best we can about what we learn. But it is a rapidly evolving situation. I mean, we've been sitting here for an hour. It could totally be something new by the end of today. So we'll see, but we'll keep an eye on it. Well, let's.
So I would say
please.
also on the NIH funding,
Oh.
the general population doesn't really understand how that research drives so many of the new innovations. Those discoveries at universities all over the
Yeah.
US are turned into, their data is licensed or contracted to pharmaceutical companies to develop the drug. And that is the pathway for so many new innovations. And it's a really critical source of hope for every
Yep.
cancer patient. And I
Yep.
just say, I'm a breast cancer survivor and a scientist, and it just breaks my heart.
Yeah. The for those of you who may not have heard the comment was just that excuse me, the NIH and the good work the folks there do to help support early stage research, help discovery translate into treatments, that part and that process is so critical to everything that happens in our industry. Nothing happens without it, quite honestly. Without that engine at the very earliest stages of this process, you really absolutely need that. And it makes hope for patients, gives them hope that there are things in development and possibilities out there for the future. So a very good, great comment. We've got just a couple minutes left. Let's do, what's the most positive thing that you've seen lately in this space? Try to end on an up note. Yeah. Something
Well-
really happy and good news you've heard.
Okay, well, I referenced it earlier, but the taxonomy of the normal breast that Dr. Hari Nakshatri has completed now is a huge step in breast cancer research. It's looking at the cellular level of breast cancer across multiple ethnicities and creates a wealth of information that researchers now and in the future will be able to learn from. I also will say that one thing that the Catherine Peachey Fund's really intrigued by and has funded a little bit already towards is AI in cancer research. And Dr. Anna Maria Storniolo is, she's a board member now. She was co-founder of the Komen Tissue Bank along with my mom, and has been the beneficiary of Peachey Fund gifts over the years. And she was one that I heard say years ago that she was so excited about the impact that AI could make on cancer research and how we could move the needle so much faster with AI. So We have funded some AI research at IU, or research that includes AI. And then just one other note, we also are really excited about the fact that there's research happening at IU about male breast cancer, and something that hasn't been explored much, but we believe there's some really low-hanging fruit there, because to date, men's treatment mirrors women's. And I'm not a scientist, but I know that that means there's low-hanging fruit for men to receive treatments, different treatments, and be more successful.
So the biggest positive I've seen, I think, is just awareness. HBCA in the last 2 legislative sessions has brought forth important positive breast cancer policy initiatives. Legislators are talking about it now. They are interested in it. They're asking questions on a bipartisan basis. These are issues, as I mentioned earlier, that we haven't really talked about at the State House for a very long time. And sometimes important policy matters take several years to build up. So I hope we're going to be able to keep working to build up awareness and knowledge, and in the end enact some good breast cancer policy. Also, just awareness in this room. Thank you, Kristen, for this opportunity to talk about what we're working on. You're not the group who I'm used to speaking in front of, so I really appreciate your attention, and hopefully you're taking back some valuable information about what is going on in the State House. Thank you.
I think one of the positive things I've seen, and I have to look back over the last few years, is a shift in an emphasis toward making sure that clinical trials are representative of the population at large. So it's the word diversity, making sure that the results reflect the needs of the community. Obviously, that was a huge push in the former administration, not so much the current administration, but I am heartened by what I see as a persistent emphasis on enrolling patients of a diverse background, making sure we have those populations represented. I think that's going to survive any political turmoil that we have.
Wonderful. I knew you guys could bring the happy back. Thank you all so much. Thank you. A wonderful hand for our panel today. Thank you so much. Please join us again next month. I'm not going to promise the topic, but I think we have a good idea of what it might be. You'll get an announcement soon. Thank you for joining us today. Stay toasty out there, and happy rest of February.